The three-day ASEAN Summit is underway in Cambodia. In a first in-person meeting of the grouping since the COVID-19 pandemic, this is day 2 of the summit that began on Friday. And today, the ASEAN leaders will be holding separate meetings with their counterparts from India, US and Japan. Earlier, the bloc held talks with the Chinese premier.
我们正在磋商 COC， 在磋商过程当中，我们照顾各方的关切，但是也坚决地维护和促进国际法，尊重包括联合国海洋法公约在内的国际法，支持依据包括公约和南海各方行为宣言在内的国际法原则，来妥善处理南海出现的一些问题。
Meanwhile, South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol said that unilateral attempts to change the status quo in the Asian region by force can never be accepted. Yoon further said that he would strengthen the shared economic prosperity based on an open and fair order.
인도태평양 지역의 평화와 안정은 우리의 생존과 번영에 직결됩니다.
The 10-nation bloc faces a multitude of issues, including the escalating crisis in Myanmar. During day 1 of the summit, the Southeast Asian heads of the government issued a warning to Myanmar to make measurable progress on a peace plan or risk being barred from the bloc's meetings. US President Joe Biden has also left for Cambodia, where he will meet the Asian heads of state and discuss a range of issues, including the issue of Myanmar, China and North Korea. Meanwhile, the ASEAN leaders have also agreed in principle to admit Timor-Leste as its 11th member. And for more on this, our principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal is joining us live from Bali. A very good morning to you, Siddhant. Now, there are a slew of meetings that are being held at the ASEAN Summit. The bloc will be holding separate talks with the leaders from India and the United States. What can be expected out of these talks?
Well, Asia Summit season is underway, and perhaps today is the second day of the focus when it comes to the summit season. We saw the ASEAN meetings happening on Friday, and today, of course, there will be the separate meetings as part of the mechanism with US, with India. The Indian Vice President has already reached Cambodia, and we will see later today the US President Joe Biden in the country taking part in the ASEAN-US meeting. But nonetheless, there are pressing issues in the region and beyond as well. When it comes to the Asian region, it is a very aggressive China, worries emanating from North Korea that dominate the focus for countries like India and for the United States, but also for Australia as well. But largely, when it comes to the outcomes, it will be on Sunday evening when the East Asia Summit comes to an end that we will see key outcome documents as to how the countries, the participating countries, and of course the ASEAN grouping take their stance on these issues. We know that on Friday the ASEAN meetings ended up with two key focus areas. One, of course, the expansion of the grouping. That was something the call was taken on. And secondly, on the situation in Myanmar, the document that was issued talked about how the military junta there needs to take an action and implement the 5-point action plan envisaged by the ASEAN grouping. There hasn't been any progress so far, and there is a looming sense of frustration in the grouping. But when things move next week, it will be the focus on the G20 summit here in Bali, where the Indian Prime Minister will be present, and of course that big ticket meeting between the US President Joe Biden and the Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Right, Siddhant, apart from the issue of Myanmar, also tell us about the US and China tensions, which is one of the prime focus at the summit, considering how both US and China are two of ASEAN's top trading partners.
Well, yes, they are, of course, top trading partners. Trade is something that has been perhaps preventing the spread of conflicts in the region. While there is a looming sense of frustration between many countries in the region, trade is something that is taking the relationship forward, whether it's India or China, or whether it's China or the United States. But talking about the meeting you asked about, now this is a significant meeting because it's the first time that the US President Joe Biden and the Chinese President Xi Jinping are meeting in person. And secondly, both have emerged from their own political situation in terms of the midterm elections in the United States. And we saw the Congress in Beijing, the meeting happening in Beijing in the month of October, in which the Chinese president got a third term in terms of leading the Communist Party. So domestic politics in the backdrop, now both leaders are meeting, and of course this will be an occasion to present the views. And of course, we do not expect key major breakthroughs, but the fact that both leaders are meeting is essentially seen as a breakthrough, given just a few months ago and of course weeks ago, we saw a situation very precarious when Nancy Pelosi, the US House's the Speaker, visited Taiwan, and that brought this region in a brink. We saw how there was essentially a blockade of Taiwan, a military blockade by the Chinese, and that led to more anxious comments or perhaps concerns from the regional capital. So will there be a kind of resolution in terms of bringing the tensions down at a time when Russia-Ukraine conflict continues to impact the world, is something that everyone is waiting for.
Thank you, Siddhant, for getting us up to speed on this. Thanks very much.